Hey, RezaieStrong follower, Salim Rezaie here. So I was recently asked to give a talk to a group of local high school students on stress, coping with stress, and self-care. And I titled that talk, Self-Care is Not Selfish. Now, I find it funny that most people will panic to find a charger when their phone battery is low, but they don't seem to panic when their own battery is running on low. And to that point, I basically talked about one of my personal stories, which was that in December of 2021, 2 years into the COVID pandemic, I crashed. I crashed from an emotional standpoint, from a mental standpoint, and from a physical standpoint. And it was for many reasons, but the key components were that I was isolated. I'm not married. I don't have kids. I was at home by myself and wasn't visiting family and friends for fear of giving them COVID because of what I do for a living. I was filling my time with just working more. So I was working like 200 plus hours per month. And then I think the thing that actually broke me was seeing patients die every day, no matter what I did, 6 to 8 times a day. And at the time when the pandemic first started, we weren't allowing family members in the hospital. And so a lot of these people were dying with me being the last person that they were seeing. And so all of that just led to me crumping. And I ended up taking a 6-month sabbatical and break from all clinical work in January of 2022. And that started with a 1-month road trip across the US. And during that time, I did a lot of reflection, a lot of journaling, and a lot of thinking about things I need to do going forward so that this doesn't happen to me again. And that's where I kind of came up with this idea of RezaieStrong that focuses on different realms of personal growth in social aspects, spiritual aspects, physical aspects, in your career, intellectually, and emotionally. And I house a lot of that information in the form of videos or little short reels on my Instagram and on my YouTube channel. So let's talk about stress, because I think that's where this all starts for a lot of us. And to me, there are basically 2 types of stress. There is where we have the abilities to deal with the demands of whatever is going on, in which case we look at that stress as a positive thing. We look at it as a challenge, something to overcome. And then there are those things where we don't have the abilities to deal with the demands, and we look at those things as threats, things that we are very fearful of and can have long-term untoward effects on us. And so you have the abilities, you can deal with the demands, personal growth, right? Short-term, one-offs, you're able to deal with it. You don't have the abilities to deal with the demands. You get overwhelmed from an emotional and mental standpoint, and that can have long-term untoward consequences. So let me give you 3 examples here. Giving a presentation, I think most of us would find that stressful. Running a marathon, from a physical standpoint, rather stressful. Taking an exam. Like you're taking your MCATs or you're taking a board exam. Now, for a presentation, I'm going to prepare. I'm going to do all the work. I'm going to do all the reading. I'm going to put in all the work into both the presentation and the slides. For running a marathon, I'm going to have a kind of series of runs that I'm going to start increasing my distance over time and kind of building up my tolerance of being able to deal with the demands of running a marathon. For taking an exam, I'm going to study. I'm going to study hard, and I'm going to do the best that I can. And that will give you all the abilities you need in each of these 3 scenarios. So for giving a presentation, the demands of not forgetting content, not embarrassing yourself, maybe in front of a large group of people. Running a marathon, the ability to finish the race. And then for taking an exam, the ability to pass. Now let me give you 3 more examples that have to do with my life as a physician working in the emergency department and the ICU, constantly dealing with emergent life and death situations. Shift work, where I'm just rotating between nights and days and messing with my circadian rhythm. interruptions and the amount of decisions that have to get made, causing decision fatigue. And the things that I should be doing to build my abilities, things like therapy, sleep hygiene, making sure I'm taking adequate advantage of rest, I find that I wasn't doing. And that led to things like feeling sad that people were dying, so feeling depressed, fatigued because my circadian rhythm was off and I wasn't getting good, restful sleep, and then just being numb and being cocooned and not wanting to be around other people because I just didn't have the mental bandwidth. So in these 6 examples I've given you, one of them kind of focuses on mental and physical aspects. It's a one-off, doing a presentation, running a marathon, taking an exam, and it's a short-term stress. And so I can build the abilities, buffer myself to be able to deal with the demands. But the last 3 examples I gave you have to do with emotional and spiritual realms of growth. And those are nonstop because we all have to work, including me. And that ends building up. And if you're not doing the things to increase your abilities, you've not given yourself a buffer. And that leads to things like moral injury, burnout, and crashing, like I much did at the end of 2021. Now, the 3 examples at the bottom, because they're one-offs, because they're simple things, relatively simple things, you look at that as personal growth, right? It's a challenge that pushes your boundaries, that gets you to a new point in your life. These last 3 examples have to do with well-being. And it's funny how we talk about habits, goals, getting in better shape, improving our diet, but we don't really talk a lot about our well-being. So I basically started doing things on shift to kind of help me with some of that well-being. Because as many of us know, the medical healthcare system from a physician standpoint can be quite daunting. And so it's this concept of micro breaks versus macro breaks, right? So micro breaks are things you do on shift. They usually take 5-10 minutes and that's about it. Macro breaks are the things we do between shifts. They can take hours to days. And so what were some of the things I was doing on shift? Stand up and stretch, stand up and walk, get out of the department for a few minutes, go find a quiet corner and do some box breathing. And I did find that all those things helped. But again, what I wasn't focusing on is what was going on between shifts, my sleep, my diet, my exercise. Was I doing things for fun like hobbies? Was I spending time with family and friends? And what I was doing is basically I was finding quick little short-term fixes to function, right? But I wasn't focusing on my well-being, which are the long-term fixes, the things that require a little more effort, which I find that many of us actually do. So now we got stress, and now we have to think about coping with that stress and how we cope with it. And in my mind, there are really multiple ways that you can cope with stress. There are maladaptive strategies, strategies that are not healthy, and then adaptive strategies, strategies that are good for you. Now, most commonly, when we talk about maladaptive, we're talking about things like suppressing, we're talking about distracting our minds, and we're talking about compartmentalizing or separating ourselves from whatever the event is. The adaptive strategy would be reappraisal, right? This is basically going through and kind of thinking through the things that have occurred, processing them, and working through them. So suppression would be things that help you numb pain, right? Drugs and alcohol are 2 things that come to mind for me. Distraction are distracting our minds. We either work more so that we don't have to think about whatever is going on. We exercise more, so again, we don't have to think about things. Or a more common one is being on social media and scrolling through things. Those are all distraction techniques. And then separation or compartmentalization is basically you don't have the capacity, you don't have that buffer to be able to deal with whatever is going on. And so you just tuck it away, you just bury it. But eventually over time, that thing will burst and kind of come out at an unexpected time, like what happened to me in 2021. Now, reappraisal actually requires some effort. You can do all these other things when you don't have the capacity, but really you need to work through things. You need to go through therapy. And I don't mean therapy in the form of a psychologist, although that is one thing that I do. It could be therapy in the time of spending with your family and friends, talking to them, getting emotional support, getting guidance, doing fun things that kind of give you some meaning to life. And so this is what we all need to kind of be striving for. Now, the ability to move from these maladaptive strategies to the adaptive strategy all has to do with what kind of buffer you've built up for yourself. And that's what gives you that capacity to cope. So healthcare system is a physician. And for those of you who are physicians or who are in healthcare, tell me that I'm wrong. We deal with high acuity illness all the time. We have high acuity, low occurrence situations. We have to remember all this stuff. People's lives are in our hands. That is not a small thing. When we go to work and we take care of patients, when we all went to school, it was to take care of patients. But the way that the healthcare system and documentation system is, when we compare charting to patient care, probably 80% of our time is spent in charting and only 20% is actually spent in patient care. Autonomy, right? We go to school so that we can learn how to make decisions, the best decisions for our patients. But now hospitals are putting all these metrics in place, which is removing a lot of decision making and basically putting these time constraints and things on us that may be not so much a good thing for patients, but are ways that these hospital systems can be reimbursed. From a lifestyle standpoint, how many holidays do you miss? How many birthdays do you miss? How many other things do you miss with your family? And that really starts to beat you down. And then something that has really, really, really become a big thing since the time of COVID is the culture of hospital systems has changed, in my opinion. They're reducing pay and they're decreasing staffing. And so now all these things that I said that are already hard are getting amplified because you have to do it more often and more frequently. And that becomes a beatdown. So I had this revelation of, man, I am really worried about all this stuff that's going on around me. I'm working in this tough healthcare system, and this is why a lot of people are leaving healthcare these days. But I don't want to leave healthcare. I still like taking care of patients. And this was the revelation. I can only control what I can control. So what are the most important things in my life? And are they things that I can control? And that is probably where I should be focusing my attention. And so if I was going to tell you what you should be focusing on, it's not what's happening around you. It's focusing on your sleep, your diet, exercise, family and friends, setting healthy boundaries, taking breaks and getting rest, working through your thoughts and emotions. And that's where self-care kind of comes in. And self-care, simply put, are activities that we do that help us improve our well-being. That is it. Now, I'm going to go through 7 different kind of recommendations in these realms of self-care: sleep, exercise, diet, family, friends, boundaries, breaks and rest, and processing thoughts and emotions. So let's start with sleep. So most of us, on average, are going to need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. If you combine that, it's about 8 hours. And the reason for that is that as we go through sleep, every cycle of non-rapid eye movement sleep and rapid eye movement sleep we go through is about 90 minutes. And so if you do the math and you go through 5 cycles, that gets you to about 8 hours. Now, with each additional cycle, you start getting more rapid eye movement sleep. This is your restorative sleep. This is the sleep that gets you back to normal, right? And so how many people pull all-nighters? How many people are functioning on 4 to 5 hours? How many people are drinking tons of caffeine or alcohol? I'm guilty of all these things. And you're not focusing on sleep, which, by the way, 1/3 of our lives is spent sleeping. And so it's probably something we should pay a lot of attention to. Now, these are just some strategies to help improve your quality of sleep. The room that you sleep in, you want to set the temperature on a cooler side. If it's too hot or too cold, you're not going to get restful sleep. You want to avoid alcohol at night. Alcohol will help you go to sleep faster, but it does not help you get more of that restorative sleep, that REM sleep. You actually get less of it. Caffeine. Caffeine hangs around forever. Now, this is one of the hardest things for me to kind of get worked out, which is not drinking caffeine 6 hours before I sleep, because it will stay in your system for many, many hours, and you might have a hard time going to sleep or not get that deep sleep that you need. Electronics. Avoid them 1 to 2 hours before you go to sleep. The blue light from electronics will engage your mind and make it difficult for you to sleep. And so getting off electronics several hours before you go to bed is very key. And then because I do a lot of shift work where I'm working at night and sleeping during the day, one of the biggest things I ever did for myself, to this day is probably the thing I'm the most happy about, is I bought blackout blinds for my room so that my room is pitch black so that I'm able to get sleep. And then there is nothing going on in that room. It is completely quiet. I don't have a TV in there. I don't have a radio in there. I have nothing in there that would be loud and prevent me from going to sleep. Next is diet. Now, you are what you eat, whether you want to believe it or not. And I was living that fast food lifestyle, no time to cook. And so what ends up happening over time is you keep living that lifestyle and you start developing inflammation and disease. And this can be physical and it can be mental. By eating a cleaner diet, just taking the time to be a little bit more kind of thoughtful in the things that you're eating is going to promote health. So I started looking for healthier options, and some of the things I first got rid of were pasta, rice, bread, and regular sodas. And I found healthy options for those. So for pasta, I started using zucchini noodles. For rice and bread, I started substituting cauliflower. For regular soda, I started moving to black coffee. These are just some easy, low-hanging fruit examples of ways to get rid of unhealthy options and move to healthier options. Obviously, I have added a lot more to this list, but this is a great place to start. I used to not cook, and now I'm always cooking. I try and prepare food for myself, and I put it in Tupperware bins, which helps me do a couple of things. Number one, it helps me with portion control, but also allows me to have food because most places I go to, like the hospital, don't really have healthy options. And so this allows me to have those healthy options when I'm hungry. Exercise. So exercise is one of the most important things I do for both my mental and physical health. And I'm sure this is true for many people. But the reality is that in any given week, going to the gym every day is not realistic. It's not sustainable, and you can't do it for the long haul. But let me tell you what is sustainable. Just walk out of your house and go walk outside for 30 minutes. Walking outside for 30 minutes every day has been shown to improve mood and to improve health. It's better than 30 minutes of sitting on the couch or just remaining sedentary. Family and friends. So if I'm at the middle of the circle, which most of us are, the outer circle to that is going to be my family, and then what I call my fave five. These are like my ride or die friends. These are the friends that I can talk to about anything, that will call me on my BS, that I make a lot of time for. And as a matter of fact, I would probably put them in my family circle, except for the point of this talk, they're going to be outside that circle. And then I have all my other friends. Now, all these people are important because they give you a sense of belonging, they boost your happiness, they decrease your stress, they improve your self-worth, and they can be huge in terms of emotional support when you're having hard times. 20 years from now, the only people that are going to remember that you worked late will be your family and friends. And so maybe we should make more time for them and work less. I got this backwards at some point. Work should be a subset of life, not a superset. And unfortunately, the way I was living my life during COVID was my life was part of work. But the reality is it should have been the other way around. Boundaries. This is one of the big things that I have really been working on because I was just a yes person. I would say yes to everything. And then my plate would just be overflowing with things. And then that just added more stress. And so when we talk about work-life balance, which by the way, I don't like this phrase. I think it's work-life decisions is probably a better way to say this, but there's really two components. There's priorities in your life. So what are your top 3 most important things? And the boundaries are the limits that you set to not allow things to override into those priorities. So let's take these one at a time. So your priorities are, just sit down and make a list of what is most important to you. For me, that list composes family and friends, diet and exercise, and my sleep. Everything else comes secondary to those 3. Don't prioritize what's on your schedule. Schedule your priorities. And so now I have started in my calendar. It used to be just when I have shifts coming up and different things going on. Now I've started putting in time with family and friends, time for diet and exercise, time for sleep. I am blocking chunks of time or days even to allow me to spend time with the things that are the most important. Now, in terms of boundaries, set limits for yourself. It's okay to reduce work hours. It's okay to unplug from technology. It is okay to say no. There should be zero guilt for any of these things. Those of us in healthcare, we've gone to school to help others, and so we feel like we have to say yes all the time. But the reality is that you have to recharge so that you can help others. And so you should have zero guilt setting some of these boundaries for yourself. Work-life balance is not about better time management, which is what I see a lot of people advocating for. It's about better choices and the choices that we make. Now, this is a matrix that I found online that I find really helpful for helping me kind of make some of these decisions. And it's basically how important is something, it's really important or it's not. And then is there like a deadline? Is there like urgently it needs to be done, or is it something that can be put off? And so in the first box, it's important and it's urgent. That means it's something I have to do now, like working a shift in the ER. I have to do that. That is a scheduled shift. There is a deadline and it's important to my livelihood. It is how I pay my bills. It is how I put food on the table. Things that are not important, or things that are not urgent but are important, like giving a lecture. I can schedule for those. I can put chunks of time aside to prepare for those. I don't have to do them right away. Email is another great example of this. There's probably some important emails I need to answer, but there's not really a deadline on it. It can be scheduled, and I do chunk times of the day to sit down and really knock out my emails. Otherwise, it all waits till the next chunk of time that I have. Now, if it's not important, you can delegate it. It doesn't need you to do it. And I felt guilty about this for a long time, but things like cleaning the house. I have a cleaning service that comes once a month. Doing yard work. I hire a lawn agency to come and do it for me. And I felt really guilty about those things, but it frees up time for me and I don't find them enjoyable. If you do find them enjoyable, then it goes up into the schedule and plan category. But for me, it's not. And so I've started delegating a lot more. And then there's everything else that's just distractions. They're not important and they're not urgent. And I'm trying to limit and delete these, like things like being on social media, for example, and wasting time on things that just aren't important. And so this can kind of give you a nice way to kind of plan your life and to kind of make sure you get things done. Now, some of you may have heard this story, but if you imagine this thing in the middle as a jar, and that jar is representative of your life, and then we have rocks, pebbles, and sand that we can put into the jar. So most of us are going to put the big rocks in, right? And so if we do that, this is what it's going to kind of look like. And so then the question is the jar full? And the answer is no, because there's still room for pebbles. And even after we put the pebbles in, is the jar full? Is your life full? And the answer is no, because there's room for sand. And so you could even add a fourth layer, which is you could fill this with water. So there are multiple layers of things that you can put into your life. So now if we do this backwards and we use sand to fill the jar, right? You now don't have room for pebbles and rocks in your jar. And so the analogy here is that if the big rocks in your life are health, family, and friends, the pebbles in your life are work and school and some of those secondary things, and sand is all the other little stuff like email, material possessions, that sort of thing. If you go about filling your jar and your life with the little small material things first, you're not going to have room in your life for the big rocks like health, family, and friends. All right, so next on self-care is breaks and rest. And I love this quote. Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. I love this quote because I do this all the time with my phone or with my computer or with other technological things, but I don't do it with myself. I don't give myself rest and breaks. And so one of the things I've really started doing, and I know this is going to sound kind of foo-foo, is box breathing. This has been a game changer for me. It only takes 5 minutes. And literally it is just focusing on your breathing in a quiet room for 5 minutes. You basically breathe in 2, 3, 4. You hold 2, 3, 4. And then you breathe out 2, 3, 4. And you hold that for 2, 3, 4. So this is where the term box breathing kind of comes from. And for me, this is a total reset, both mentally and physically. From a mental standpoint, it reduces racing thoughts or anxiety that I have. It reduces stress. It improves my attention and my mood. It just re-engages me. From a physical standpoint, I can tell you that it reduces cortisol, which is our stress hormone, which ultimately ends up reducing heart rate, blood pressure, and pain. And I have one of these Apple Watches, and I can literally look at my heart rate before and my heart rate after. And I can tell you that it is definitely reduced when I do this. And the times I typically do this are before I go to sleep so that I can calm down my racing mind. I do it at work sometimes in the middle of shifts. And anytime I'm feeling or noticing that I'm stressed or anxious, I will do this as a reset for myself. I've started reading a lot more for leisure. This is not something I've done in a very long time. And these are just some of the books that I've read in the past year. Atomic Habits, great book on habits. Presentation Zen. I wanted to do better with my presentation design and lecturing. After all, I am on a YouTube channel. And so I thought this was important to kind of up my game in terms of how I do my presentations. Make It Stick. Great book on learning theories for anybody that's in education or is a student or matriculating through school. And then currently I'm reading a book called Do Hard Things, which is basically talking about toughness and all the different aspects and what we've gotten wrong and what we've gotten right when it comes to the thought of process and doing hard things in our life. Hobbies. I've started doing woodworking. These are just some of the things I've made in the last couple of years. It's been a lot of fun. I've never done it before, and it actually makes me really happy. It's a way to disconnect my mind from all the other crazy responsibilities that I have, and it lets me create something out of nothing. And so I found it like really a lot of fun. And so it's something that I highly recommend. Travel. Before COVID, tons. I made it a point to go to one local place in the US and one international place somewhere in the world. Well, during COVID, it was kind of hard to travel, but since COVID, I've not done as great with that. And so I've really started this year kind of focusing on planning at least 2 big trips for myself for a duration of at least 1 week that I can go and do something and just kind of disconnect, reflect, and just kind of re-energize. I told you I'm not married. I don't have kids. I have a lot of isolation. I got a dog this past year. His name is Ginobili. And these are just some pictures of things that when I first got him and things that we're doing together. In the bottom left is a picture of him and in the ICU during the holidays. The picture next to that is when we went hiking up the mountains up in Colorado. The picture next to that is when he graduated and became a service dog. The picture on the top right is his graduating service dog class, and he is the little dog amongst all the big dogs. The picture below that is his first birthday, and we got him a cool little hat, and he's been a lot of fun, and I'm really glad I got him. It was something my therapist recommended, and I'm not saying everybody has to go out and get pets, but man, it's unconditional love and just makes you happy every time they're around. Finally, processing thoughts and emotions. And if you guys have ever seen this movie, Inside Out, it's a great movie. It's a cartoon, but it's about this girl and all the different emotions she has going on in her head and how those emotions translate into actions. And the 5 kind of emotions that they kind of highlight in this movie are sadness, joy, fear, disgust, and anger. And so I told you one thing I've started doing is therapy, because I feel like my emotional intelligence and my processing of emotions was not very good. And it's something that was really important to me, and is something I've continued doing for the last couple of years. It helps me with stress management, trauma resolution from childhood even, ability to set boundaries, stress relief, the ability to talk about things, regaining emotional balance, better relationships. That includes both in dating and also with family and friends, and then overcoming negative patterns, things that I wasn't really working on in the past. Keeps me accountable. Now, I find it funny because, most of us talk about, regardless of what you're in, having teachers, having coaches, and having mentors. But then there's this stigma when it comes to therapists. And I like to think of each of these as something kind of additive. If we go from left to right, we have our basic, whatever our skills and our competency is. And then if we go across that line, we kind of get personal development. And then the duration for which the impact of each of these has on us can be short term all the way up to long term. And so teachers kind of help us with giving us knowledge, right? They transfer knowledge to us. Coaches help us with motivation and experience. Mentors kind of give us advice and guidance. But what a lot of us don't work on is all the emotional stuff, the stuff going on in our heads. And that's where I see a therapist. I see it no different as having a teacher, a coach, or a mentor. It's just an additive piece, but it has much, much longer impacts in terms of personal growth and emotional IQ. I'm not a big kind of gratitude person, but this is something I've really been dabbling in over the last year. And that is that I have like a little journal next to my bed on my nightstand. And every night I sit down and I kind of reflect on my day. And no matter if it was a good day or a bad day, I try and write down things that I'm happy for, that I'm grateful for. And the reason I do this is because it helps reduce stress, anxiety, and depression for me. There might be thoughts kind of ruminating in my mind, and sometimes I find that I can't shut my brain down. And by journaling and thinking about things that I'm grateful for, it really does help me kind of wind down. The other thing is that it increases happiness. And the reason it increases happiness is because by thinking about all the positive things or the things that you're grateful for, it becomes additive over time, because as the day goes along, you start noticing things. Because you're journaling at night, you want to put those into your journal. And it helps you build an emotional IQ. And so I really do recommend doing this. It doesn't have to take long. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Just think of one thing you're grateful for or you're happy about. And then this has obviously been something that's all over like social media and the psychology world. And that is a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And there's all these different realms in terms of how they're different. So when we talk about skills and intelligence, a fixed mindset basically is I'm set, I have what I have, I can't get better. A growth mindset basically tells me that I can actually develop these. I can grow them, I can develop them, I can get better at them. When we talk about fixed mindset versus growth mindset for what our main concern is, for some people in the fixed mindset category, you care about the performance, how good you're doing. But the reality is that by working on the process that gets you to that performance, that is actually what's going to get you the performance. So don't focus on the end result, focus on the process in terms of what you're working on. Effort. Fixed mindset is like, this is just something I have to do. A growth mindset, it's just, this is an important part of learning. And so I'm going to put effort. It's one of the many reasons I started doing Rebel EM, which is a critical appraisal blog, because I don't want to just go to shift and just do it because it's something I have to do. I want to be the best possible doctor that I can be. And so I like reading a lot of the literature that kind of is ongoing. Challenges. This is a part of life. If you have a fixed mindset, you kind of give up and you check out. But if you have a growth mindset, you look at it as something to persevere through, right? Something to work through, having grit, right? A challenge, something to overcome, pushing that boundary of your comfort zone into a growth zone. Feedback. This is so important, and it's a two-way street. It's the person giving the feedback and the person receiving the feedback. And people with a fixed mindset, they take feedback personally and they get very defensive and shut down. People with a growth mindset, they like it and they use it to learn. We all have blind spots, and feedback sometimes can help us with that. And then finally, mistakes, right? A lot of us want to avoid them, but people with a fixed mindset, we try and avoid them. We kind of have that perfectionist mentality. I had that at one time. And others with a growth mindset use that as an opportunity to learn. This is one way not to do it. Thomas Edison, I think, and I'm not going to quote him exactly, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I basically learned 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. And so that's what making mistakes is all about in life. So is there evidence to support using self-care in our everyday lives? And there was a study published in 2018 in the BMC Medical Education Journal. 800 medical students were surveyed. And to kind of spare you all the numbers and stats and graphs, basically they looked at self-care. And they wanted to look at the students that were engaged in self-care versus the students that weren't. And the ones that were engaged in some form of self-care had a higher quality of life and lower perceived stress. And those that didn't had a lower quality of life and higher perceived stress. So there is evidence to support doing this for yourself. Now, I've covered 7 types of self-care that I've applied to my life, but the reality is there are all kinds of different realms of self-care. There's physical, which I did cover, nutrition, exercise, and sleep. There's mental, mindfulness, self-talk, therapy. There's emotional, gratitude, what triggers you, journaling. There's spiritual, which is meditation, nature, and yoga. There's intellectual, which is reading, learning, and hobbies. Environmental, the environment that you live in. I don't think I even touched on this. Is it a clean environment? Do you feel safe in your environment? Social, right? This is setting boundaries with family and friends and then getting that sense of connection. And then financial is another one I didn't cover, which is having a budget, learning how to save instead of spending on tangible things. These are all different opportunities to kind of help you with self-care in your life. So in the end, self-care is not selfish. I hope you guys got some valuable stuff out of this. I covered a lot of things on here. Let me know your thoughts, comments, and questions, any other ideas that you have. Thank you guys, and until next time.